Okay, well, we've got Michael Wilcox back in the studio. Thank you for
Thank
being
you.
here. We're so excited that you're in town and around, and we're really glad to have you back.
Thank you.
I
Always
was-
fun, always enjoyable.
Yeah, I was looking back through the old podcast feed today and realized it's been 3 years actually since we recorded this epic episode, God's Many Voices, and it was the summer of 2021, and that episode all by itself has had such a profound impact on Faith Matters, actually, but it's like become the language that we use to talk about what we're trying to do. And so we're just so grateful. It was so fun to look back and say, wow, that's been a long time. And that I remember you saying the words Bhagavad Gita, and I was like, what is that? And it's so weird to think back to that time and realize you were really a bridge for us. Like, you introduced us to these things that were very new, and that was a really important conversation for us. So
we'll try and throw a few more in today.
Yes.
I'm always trying to grab from the world.
I'm a statistics guy, and I will just say that is one of the most listened to episodes of all time, of the
3 years later,
hundreds that we've done.
Yeah.
And to this day too, on the qualitative side, people will occasionally come up and just grab my arm and say, Michael Wilcox.
Oh dear.
Yeah, I think that message really resonated with us, and it resonated with the audience too, I think. And so that's why we wanted to have you back, because we're hoping that you can bring all that wisdom to the topic of the marginalized. And it's a topic that we care so much about, and that can be so hard to talk about, and can sometimes be really difficult to see a way forward. And we thought we would just love to hear what you've learned from your own life, from the wisdom traditions that you love, and from great literature. And so can we just start with let's just start with general principles.
We're gearing this towards particularly one group, the LGBTQ. Yeah. What principles that I'm going to give are going to apply broadly everywhere, but particularly in terms of what I call the Pride neighborhood and the Proclamation neighborhood. My life has been lived in the dynamics, an interchange of those two neighborhoods. Over the years, before I was born, I was involved in the dynamics of those two neighborhoods. So I would just start with something C.S. Lewis said, because I can never do anything without C.S. Lewis. I did my dissertation on him. In the Chronicles of Narnia, Aslan, the Christ figure, often says to the children, "Child, I am telling you your own story, not hers. I tell no one any story but their own." So I'm going to tell you my story, my father's story eventually, and the principles that helped in that. And the principles are the laws that I have tried to use. I travel a lot. I'm with a lot of different people. And especially I have a deep place in my heart for marginalized people. And anymore, we are all marginalizing each other all the time. And we just need to try and stop doing that. So my life, if you try to visualize a village, a township, if you prefer a street on a neighborhood, whatever, I a village. And there are two neighborhoods in the village. One of the neighborhoods is called, for brevity and for clarification, the Proclamation on the Family Village. And the other is called the Pride. It's simpler than saying LGBTQ+. And we have people in both neighborhoods that interact with each other, that they don't know where. If you try and put them in one or the other, where are you going to put them? Okay. So that's been my life. The dynamics of my life have been that way. If you were to ask, I'd probably say my mind gives rational assent to the Proclamation neighborhood. But because of people that I have known, my father, who was gay, my mother's favorite brother, and my favorite uncle, Uncle Duna, was gay. He will die of HIV in the first wave. It was always wonderful to be with Duna and my mother. They had what the Danish call hygge. In a marginalized world, we need more hygge. Hygge means to make people feel cozy and warm and comfortable and accepted. And the Danes are marvelous at it. And I used to watch my mother and my uncle. And a companion I was with 4 months in the mission field opened up one night. This is 1970. And not knowing what to do, Elder R. Loved him like a brother, one of my best friends, still for years. And then I've had parents, and it just seems like my whole life has been engaging in the dynamics of these two. So my heart and my affinity has immense love and depth for the Pride neighborhood. I love the Proclamation neighborhood. And I've never felt I had to make a choice between the two. So we just need to learn how to maneuver it. So I'm going to give you a few the principles that I use, and hopefully you'll all know. And the first one, the overarching one that I call it the is it I principle. I think everybody knows that at the Last Supper, Jesus is telling them, one of you will betray me. And instead of pointing the finger and saying, oh, I'll bet it's Philip over there. It's probably Judas. Okay. They each said, Lord, is it I? I sometimes call this generation the selfie generation. We got the camera always pointed at ourselves. I think we need to turn it around and point it outward a little bit more, certainly in this area. But there's one place that you always need to take the selfie, and that is how am I doing in what I'm always trying to take the selfie in, am I living the laws of the village that's going to help the two neighborhoods? Because I live in both. So I don't want the Proclamation people, as they listen, neighborhood, to say, yeah, you Pride neighborhood, are you listening to that? And I don't want the Pride neighborhood to say to the Proclamation, yes, that's a good principle. You need to apply that. We want to take the selfie. Does that make sense in what I'm trying to say? Okay, so that's the number one. Okay, that's the overarching one. So the first one then that I would I'll take you to the scriptures a little bit, is what I call the Zacchaeus principle. If you like principle or law, Joseph Smith said, I teach them correct principles and they're going to govern themselves. So once I get it into my mind, now I've got how am I going to apply this? If you like law, I don't like the word rules, but for me, this is the principles, the laws, the rules of my life in my village. Okay. So I'm taking this to Luke chapter 19. It's Zacchaeus. Jesus is coming into Jericho, and everybody wants to see him. And there's two groups. This is the best marginalization scripture I know of anywhere. Okay. Behold, there was a man named Zacchaeus, which was the chief among the publicans, and he was rich. Now he has an occupation that's odious to them. He sought to see Jesus, who he was. He could not for the press, because he was little in stature. Now, in life, we can divide people into the press. I don't mean CNN and NBC. All the people that feel comfortable with each other. There they are. Can you see them all lined up on the road of Jericho? All the Proclamation people, they feel real comfortable with each other. They share the same, or all the Pride people, or all those who favor the Palestinians. I mean, there's all kinds of marginalized and different things. So they're very comfortable. And then there's the little of stature people. Little of stature in the eyes of the press, because they're different somehow. They're different physically, different race, different religion, the personality differences, physical, and so we marginalize them. They're not important. We don't like them. And they're behind the line. Can you see him running back and forth behind the line? He can't see. He just wants to see Jesus, just like everybody. So what does he do? He ran before and climbed up into a sycamore tree to see him, for he was to pass that way. You can see him up there, can't you? Well, for me, the Zacchaeus law is don't put anybody in the tree. Okay? don't force anybody into the tree. And we do it all the time. So of all the people in Jericho, who do you think Jesus is going to spend the day with? And beautiful words, when Jesus came to the place, he looked up and saw him and said, Zacchaeus, make haste and come down, for today I must abide at thy house. And then in the interest of brevity, he ends it, this day is salvation come to this house, for as much as he also is a son of Abraham. We're all sons and daughters of God. We just don't want to put anybody in the tree. And we want to always be aware that maybe somebody's there. And so often I try in my prayers in the morning to say, Father in heaven, help me look up and see the Zacchaeuses and the Zacchaeurinas in the tree and bid them come down because they are sons and daughters of God. That's the Zacchaeus law. And I'm going to give you the second one, and then I'm going to do a little bit out of Les Mis because Victor Hugo was really good at understanding that principle. But if I had to pick just one principle, one law that really dealt with marginalization, that would be it. So now let me take you to the next one. You got comments? Yeah,
I love that.
Whatever,
well,
yeah.
Something I hadn't thought about with that story is that it's interesting that it even notes his profession, that was the thing that he was sort of judged about, his profession. And it's interesting that sort of feels like the impulse when there is a group that feels that is marginalized. There's something very human in us that wants to justify the marginalization. And,
right, yeah.
And it feels like that is maybe part of this story.
He's a publican. He's corrupt.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Because the system invited corruption.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it seems like Jesus was just so counterintuitively and radically focused on the marginalized throughout his ministry. This is a perfect illustration, but it's just so subversive almost to the way we've constructed society, both I think back in ancient Jewish and Roman times and in the society that we're living in now. We care so much about status and belonging to the in-group.
The press,
what
I call.
Yeah. Looking right, being right, acting right.
Right.
And Jesus turned that all on its head.
Yeah, he did. I love it. It's one of my favorite stories. So now I'm just going to go a little earlier in Luke. And I like to, when I teach this, say to people, I'm going to tell you about 2 men. It's a parable. I want you to tell me the differences between these 2 men.
Okay.
So here's the parable. I'll just do the first few verses. There was a certain rich man which was clothed in purple and fine linen and fared sumptuously every day. And there was a certain beggar named Lazarus, which was laid at his gate full of sores, and desiring to be fed with the crumbs which fell from the rich man's table. Moreover, the dogs came and licked his sores. Now I'll stop. Now, what are the differences? I won't try and embarrass you. Okay, I'm going to do that to you.
I'm ready.
Okay, I'm going to do that to you. But I'll tell you, people say one's rich, one's poor. One is healthy, one is sick.
Yeah.
One is clothed well, one is
naked or close
naked.
Yeah. One is
hungry.
One is hungry.
Yeah.
One is, and then I say to people, you've missed the most important difference of all. One has a name and the other does not. So which one did Jesus give the name to? The one outside the gate. That's the one he gave the name to. I think he did it on purpose. He was such a masterful teacher anyway. Mm-hmm. Lazarus gets the name. And so for me, I call this the Lazarus Law. Okay? Always remember everyone has a name. There's no such thing as LGBTQ, the Palestinians, the Jews. Okay? They all have names. They're individuals, people. There's no such thing in a sense. Well, there is, but in a sense, There's not the church. It's people. They have names, they have hopes, they have dreams, they have aspirations, they have weaknesses, they have regrets, they have joys. We always have to remember, I think he's trying to teach us that these people have names. And we never want to forget that. I remember when I was, just a quick example, when I was a brand new bishop and I had to give an ecclesiastical endorsement to a young woman who wanted to go to BYU. Now, technically, I could not give her the ecclesiastical endorsement. But she was so repentant. She was so devastated. She was so full of fear. She just, and I signed her, I let her go. And then immediately I think, what have I done wrong? I mean, I felt, you like to say, well, I hope the Spirit was telling me to let her go, am I? And I got down on my knees very quickly and I said, Father in heaven, if I've done wrong, forgive me. I never want to hurt the church. And one of those moments when the Lord I'm going to teach you a message here. And this is what he said. My people are my church. There's no such thing as the church. They're people. And we make decisions based on people. That's the Lazarus principle. That's the Lazarus Law that I try to live. Okay? So now if I take those and if we have time, I've got, I love Les Mis. It's the most humane novel ever written. Okay, Brothers Karamazov is the most Christian novel written. And you get both of those in their look, and they have names. So Jean Valjean, everybody knows that, but we don't know where it comes from. We talked about this at lunch the other day. Yes. This is Hugo, how he introduces him. Jean Valjean or Vla Jean. He switches the L and the A. Jean or Vlajan, probably a nickname, a contraction of Voila, Jean. So Jean Valjean really means John, look at John. And Hugo is going to do that in another, he's going to do it with Eponine too. Okay? He's going to bring us back to it. He says this a little bit later. What a mournful moment it is that in which society withdraws itself and gives up a thinking being forever. All his past life was effaced, even to his name. He was no longer Jean Valjean. He was everybody knows it, most famous number in literature, 24601. So it isn't LGBTQ, and it isn't the church. Okay? These are people. Eponine doesn't know she loves Marius. And this is how he introduces Eponine later in the novel when Marius begins to see him. She and her sister were sad creatures without name, without age, without sex, to whom neither good nor evil were any longer possible, for whom on leaving childhood there is nothing more in this world. Again, the nameless masses of the poor, okay? The marginalized. Okay? And when she dies, she pulls the gun and takes the bullet instead of Marius. He raised his eyes and recognized the unfortunate child who had come to his room one morning. Eponine. He now knew her name. Eponine, she repeated in surprise. How do you know that my name is Eponine? So it's a powerful thing in Les Mis. So anyway, that's the Zacchaeus Law and the Lazarus Law. Yeah. So let me take us to another one. I got to get my quotes out here. Okay. This is what I call the fire from heaven law. okay? Or the two mountaintop law or principle, whatever you want. So Jesus is on his way to Jerusalem. This involves the Samaritans. I got to get my spot here. Now, the Samaritans were marginalized by the Jews, and, the Samaritans didn't like the Jews any more than the Jews liked the Samaritans. We marginalize each other. The word we use now is cancel. Cancel is the ultimate marginalization, okay? So he's going to Jerusalem. A big argument between the Jews and the Samaritans was, which mountain do you pray on? Which do you worship on? Mount Gerizim, Samaritan mountain. Mount Zion in Jerusalem, the Jewish one. And the Samaritans are going to say, our mountain is older than your mountain. Joshua and Moses gave us our mountain. David gave you yours. Okay? So Jesus sends the disciples ahead to prepare the Samaritan village to receive him. But when they find out he's going to Jerusalem, you're going to worship on that mountain. They reject him. They won't even let him in town. And James and John, this is we get. Here's the story. He sent messengers before his face, and they went and entered into a village of the Samaritans to make ready for him. When they did not receive him, because he's going, because his face was as though he would go to Jerusalem. When his disciples, James and John, saw this, they said, Lord, wilt thou that we command fire to come down from heaven and consume them, even as Elijah did? I wish somebody had pointed that out to the Spanish Inquisition. And Jesus said, rebuke them. You know not what manner of spirit you are of. For the Son of Man is not come to destroy men's lives, but to save them. And then a lovely ending. And he went to another village. So the fire from heaven principle is twofold. One, the Savior would say, don't reject somebody. Don't refuse to receive someone because they worship on a different mountaintop than you do. Because they have different beliefs, different values, different ways of living than you do. And the second one, we've got to stop calling down fire from heaven on one another. Now, we do it verbally. And this little gadget I have here in my hand is the fire from heaven dispenser. Okay. We are constantly calling fire down from heaven on each other. Yeah. All kinds of groups, right? Yeah. You can get people in both camps, bitterness, anger, judgment, condemnation, cancellation.
Yeah. I think where I see this happening, this may have been different 50 or 100 or 200 years ago, but I think from my perspective, there was a lot of judgment about who's worshiping on the other mount, in terms of, you belong to a different religion or a different sect, and we see things differently, and we're right and you're wrong. And it seems like maybe even in the last 10 years, what I've witnessed in our church and our tradition is that we do have a lot of tolerance for those who started out on another mount. And we even, and this is a good illustration of what you talked about with us 3 years ago. I think we are doing a much better job of integrating wisdom and faith from other traditions. Where I see us potentially still going wrong is if somebody started out on the same mount as us and then they went and worshiped on another mount. Right. And maybe it's the mount of, if you're starting from the Latter-day Saint mount, right? If you go to the atheist mount, right, or the Buddhist mount or whatever, then people on our mount are like, well, that's not okay because you used to be at our mount and you were one of us. Yeah. And I think a lot of times too, when I have certainly seen that people who go to the post Latter-day Saint mount, I think there can be some animosity coming back toward the Latter-day Saint mount as well. Have you seen this, or do you? Yeah, whenever you have differences, we judge. Like I always say, that's where I started. I'm not telling anybody anyone else's story but my own, right?
we just don't want to be in a condemning fire from heaven attitude in anger because of differences. I love the Buddha. The Buddha is so wise all the time. And he has a little thing I tell myself all the time. When he saw problems or he had people asked him questions, he didn't give answers. He would say, it is not helpful. It is not useful. So it is not helpful. It is not useful. If somebody goes to the other mountain, we want them to come to our mountain, right? In terms of our pride and proclamation, there is a lot of fire from heaven coming down, and it is not helpful. It is not useful. We have to learn politics, just to be careful. There's I don't know, do you know who Joseph Brodsky is?
No.
He's a Nobel Prize literature winner, okay, Russian. But, anybody who wanted to write pretty openly, they're going to come to America. They're going to come to the West. So he comes to the West, and he was giving I love this whole talk he gave in Ann Arbor to the graduates in Michigan. And this is his advice to them. I would advise you to lower your voice, too. But I'm afraid you will think I'm going too far. Young college kids are all in protest and get angry and we're going to change the world, okay? We need some shouting, young people sometimes say. I think Jesus is saying, no fire from heaven, okay? Buddha is saying, not helpful, not useful. I'm afraid you'll think I'm going too far. Still, keep in mind that there is always somebody next to you, a neighbor. Nobody asks you to love him. We're going to correct that in a second. But try not to hurt or discomfort him too much. Try to tread on his toes carefully. If worse comes to worse, try to remember how far away from the stars, from the depths of the universe, perhaps from the opposite end, came this request not to do it, as well as the idea of loving your neighbor no less than yourself. See, a lot of times we have to remember this isn't coming from Salt Lake or the Vatican. It's coming from the center of the universe. And don't love each other, but don't discount. If you can help making each other feel uncomfortable, don't do it. We want a hygge world if we can get it. Yeah. Okay. Then he says, of all the parts of the body, be most vigilant over your index finger, for it is blame thirsty.
Wow.
No matter how abominable your condition may be, try not to blame anything or anybody. History, the state, superiors, race, parents, the phases of the moon, childhood, etc., etc. Okay? The very list later on, he says, is vast and tedious. And the very fact that it is so vast and tedious should be a warning that we probably ought not to choose from it. So that's kind of let's not call down fire from heaven. That's the next principle.
Yeah. I'm thinking about how my mind's racing of all of these. I feel like there are examples of people who were loud and were angry and helped bring about really important change throughout the history of even just our country. But so I feel like there's some resistance there. Like I feel like I can imagine that there are people who are moved by the Spirit to be loud and angry and demand change when it's doing a lot of harm. And at the same time, I'm recognizing that in a very personal way, I feel like where I have had the most influence are in these cozier relationships where we're speaking heart to heart and there's some vulnerability and honesty and love. And so I'm like, I just want to say, like, I can see that I imagine there are situations I don't understand where that's totally necessary. And I have felt called to do this in the way that you're explaining. So I'm not really sure. Maybe this is just one more example of, how we just aren't capable of judging what another's job is to do. And so I appreciate this invitation to be reflective about what's actually most effective. And sometimes calling down fire from heaven is like an internal storm. Like sometimes I feel like justified in my anger and it doesn't go anywhere. It's just like spinning. And I can see that has not been very useful for me. And what has been useful is like trying to understand somebody in the other neighborhood, like genuinely trying to understand and have relationships. And I feel like we both, like that has been the most edifying and transformative in my very personal life. But it's uncomfortable because maybe just because my impulse is to say, and so that's what everyone should do. And maybe that's the point.
Well, Jesus did drive the money changers out. Okay.
Yeah.
But I anticipated that response.
Okay.
Actually. Okay. So
he's listened to this podcast before.
No. Well, I try and, I mean, I've lived in this world all my life.
Okay.
and I travel in it constantly. So, let's go to the next.
He already had his scriptures open. I will see.
Yeah.
No. I'm going to take us to the next one, and we're going to see. So this is what I call to the 5 verb law, or the publican principle. Okay, this is Jesus in the Sermon on the Mount. You all know it really well. It's love your enemies, bless it. So there's 5 verbs that he uses. It's love, bless, do good to, pray for, and salute. Now, salute means to greet or be kind to, depending on the intent. Okay, so we're going to do those. And you know who we're supposed to do it to. Okay? So if I'm going to reword that, I reworded it just a little bit for you here, just for fun. The 5 verbs. I'm always trying to remember. Do I remember the 5 verbs? Okay. Get angry at wasn't one of them. Okay. Love, bless, do good to, pray for, salute, or be kind to those who disagree with you, cancel you, condemn and judge you, mock or ridicule you, marginalize, dismiss, despise you, are angry and hate you. Now he ends that with how to measure our discipleship. And this is how he ends it. If you love them which love you, what reward have you? Do not even the publicans the same? And if you salute, greet, or are kind to, have hygge with, your brethren only, what do ye more than others? Do not even the publicans the same. Be ye therefore perfect. The context of be ye therefore perfect is I want you to treat everybody the same. So the measure of my discipleship is not how, if I'm in the Pride neighborhood, how I do good to, love, salute, bless, and pray for those. It's how I do it to the others, to those in the proclamation one, if there's hostility, okay, or black or white or whatever, okay. The measure, he's saying, look, it's very easy to agree and salute and be kind and love those that agree with you. But the measure of your discipleship is how you interact with those who disagree with you. You liberals on this side, how do you deal with the conservatives over here in politics? That is hard teaching. That is difficult ways of thinking about it. But going back to your thing, sometimes we need it, you know. I love Lincoln's, I'm going to go to Lincoln now. I love Lincoln's second inaugural address. It is engraven in stone. It ought to be in the Lincoln Memorial. It is how he would have handled the post-Civil War world had he lived. And he says, with malice toward none, with charity for all, with firmness in the right as God gives us to see the right. Little humility in there. I'm pretty sure I'm right, but little humility as God sees us, gives us to see the right. Let us strive on to finish the work we are in. And then such an important phrase, to bind up the nation's wounds. So before I get involved in whatever, I need to say, Is there malice in my heart? If there is, I'm part of the problem. I am not part of the solution. Is there charity in my heart? Now I'm part of the solution. Is what I'm doing healing wounds or making them wider? And far too often, angry protests make the wounds wider. Who are the two most effective people in the last century of bringing about change in those things? I would say Gandhi in India and Martin Luther King Jr. in America. They accomplished not all of their goals, but they got a lot farther in what they were doing, because they basically said, if you've got malice and anger in your heart, it's easy to love those that agree with you. I want to know how you feel about the guy over there that's marginalizing you. And if you can't do it with love, with charity, saluting, praying for him, do good, then don't get in the line, because you're going to be part of the problem, not part of the solution. Does that make some sense?
Yeah. And I know this probably isn't part of the plan to go here, but the big question to me then is, okay, yes, I have malice in my heart, or yet like I'm feeling the anger. And I think anger is usually a really appropriate reaction for when a boundary has been crossed. Like when you really you're seeing something that that you feel some conviction about that is wrong. Right. So what do you do with it when you're like, yes, that is me? I guess, like, I recognize I am part of the problem in some way. Then what do you do with it?
There's probably some distinction to be made between malice and anger, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah.
Well, again, I go back to the Buddha. I might say, is it helpful? Is it useful? Is it healing?
Okay. Yes.
See? And if I say,
okay,
I think maybe sometimes we just need to change things, but I don't know that hate and anger and calling down fire from heaven, as I call it, is the next principle kind of addresses part of that.
Okay.
I'm trying to see
that's
through all of this.
And I guess from my perspective, like anger is something that potentially we can't avoid feeling at all times. And it might be useful. It might be helpful.
Yeah.
Because it might be pointing us to an injustice that we need to work toward. Work toward fixing. Malice, on the other hand, I think a useful definition might be the desire to wound.
Right. Yes. Yeah.
And I think that is probably never helpful or useful.
Yeah.
It's very different than even a potential anger that is driving toward a healing solution of some kind.
Yeah.
It might be, I would say also, if you ever have to go to it, it is the last place you go when everything else fails. But in today's world, usually it's the first place we have to go.
Yeah.
Now, the next one is, I call it the 490 law. Okay, these are the laws of my life. You probably know what the 490 law is, or the 7 times a day law. So Jesus was asked by Peter, you know where I'm going. How many times did I forgive my brother? Until 7 times? No, until 70 times 7. So in our marginalizing different opinions worlds, where sometimes anger and malice and where we wound one another, we say things that are offensive, Just last night on the news, Pope Francis had said something in a meeting that was, I didn't know what he said. They didn't, but it was somehow wounded to the gay community, and he apologizes. Jesus said, if your brother sins against you 7 times in a day, you forgive him every time. So I get 497 times a day. That's the kind. There's a wonderful little poem by Robert Frost, and then we'll move on in interest of time, and a little poem called The Star Splitter, where the people in the neighborhood, I won't tell you the whole thing, but one of the men aggravates the village where Frost is living in his desire for a telescope. And they're all upset at him. And this is what Frost writes: we'd see to him tomorrow, But the first thing next morning, we reflected, if one by one we counted people out for the least sin, it wouldn't take us long to get so we had no one left to live with. For to be social is to be forgiving. And it's that last line that for me is such an important one. To be social is to be forgiving. What's the word in our modern parlance, our modern language? When do we use social most?
Social media.
Social media. Now, I would ask you, is social media a forgiving place? No, it is not a forgiving place. But to be social is to be forgiving. If you're going to need it every day, and you're going to need to give it every day. If you can't, go live in a cave somewhere out in the desert, because to be social is to be forgiving. My next one is called the invisible gorilla. Okay, and I think a lot of people know this. There's a very famous test that they did where they have two teams of basketball players. I almost hate to tell you this if you don't know it, you can do it. And they're passing the basketball rapidly, running all over in a small confined space. And you are told to watch the white team and count how many times they pass the ball. Do you know this, Tim? No. See, we should have excused him, and you could have. Anyway, and they're passing the ball, and you focus on that white team, because there's going to be the black team in there, and they're going to be passing the ball too, and it's going to be confusion. So you keep an eye on how many times, and you count them. And then it's about 60, 80 seconds, whatever. And they pass the ball back and forth. And you count 1, 2, I think it's 15. When I did it, I got 13. I felt pretty good about it. Well, in the middle of all this, a gorilla, a man in a gorilla suit, walks right through the game, stands in the middle, stops, pounds his chest a couple of times, slowly walks off. And when it's all over, they say to you, how many times did the white team pass the ball? And you say, I said 13. Well, yeah, it was pretty good. It was actually 15, but you did pretty good. Did you see anything else? No? You didn't see the gorilla. A gorilla? Yeah, a gorilla walked right through the game, stopped, pounded his chest, and walked off. No, and I'll show you. And they show it again, and now you're looking for it. There it is. Now, Daniel Kahneman, he won a Nobel Prize. You know who you're nodding your head. Yeah. He won a Nobel Prize in economics, I think it was. He quotes that, and then he gives this wonderful statement. He says, the message of that is that we are blind to the obvious and blind to our blindness. So I call it like the gorilla law, okay, the invisible gorilla law. So in conversing with the proclamation, the pride neighborhood, whatever neighborhoods we're dealing with, we always want to say, we're so busy passing the ball to our own team, we don't see the obvious. So we want to always say, help me see what I'm missing. If I'm in a proclamation position, I want to say to the pride neighborhood. Or if I'm Jewish, I want to say to the Palestinian. Or if I'm Palestinian, I want to say to the Jewish. I want to say, help me see what I'm missing. Is there a gorilla? Is there something obvious that I'm not seeing? And I don't even know I'm not seeing it. Does that make sense? Yeah. So the last one is what I call the Pilate principle, or the Pilate law. And we go back to the New Testament now, Jesus' trial. Pilate is asking him, and Jesus says, I came to teach truth. And Pilate asks the question, what is truth? And doesn't stay around for an answer. Now, there's another version of that I'll tell you in a second. So what we want to, always at the back of our mind with all the discussions and whatever, deeply and sincerely, we always want to be saying, what is truth? And wait for the answer. Yeah. section 49, I think it is, begins with the Shakers. Said, they desire to know the truth in part, but not all. Well, I can apply that to me there. Sometimes I want to pass the ball to my own team, and I don't want to see something that maybe is there. So we always want to be saying what is true. And so in another introduction to the Doctrine and Covenants, I've got it because it's not in the scriptures. Joseph says, as almost every person has advocates for both theory and practice in the various notions and projects of the age, it became necessary to inquire of the Lord. So, which is what you're saying. Okay, so he says everybody's got an advocate. You can find somebody. You can find the craziest conspiracy things on the internet you want. This, and once again, I say this is not the best place to be finding capital T truth. But that's what we want to be finding, and sometimes our marginalizing of each other is either we both stop looking for it, or we think we found it, and we just want to be able to always remember this is what I'm looking for. I'll end with the alternative. In one of the apocryphal writings, Pilate stays for an answer.
Really?
My principle is stay for the answer. Okay, stay for the answer. We're looking for it. Okay, don't just grab the notion that you like. You're going to have to inquire of God and figure out for whatever issue you're looking at. Don't marginalize other people who are looking to. We're all looking, and hopefully we're going to find it. Yeah. In the other one, when Pilate says, what is truth? Jesus says, truth is from above, which is what Joseph is saying. It's necessary sometimes to go to a higher source than a Google search. The internet will feed your resentment. That's what it'll do. It just feeds your resentment. God won't do that. So Jesus says, truth is from above. And Pilate says, then is there none here below? And Jesus replies, you see what they do to those who bear witness of it. What do? They cancel. They marginalize. They call down fire. Okay? That's what they do. And if we could just say we're all looking for truth, and hopefully together we'll find it. And until we do, let's not try and burn each other up. Okay. Hopefully that's kind of what I've tried to do in this particular area of pride and proclamation, but in all areas of marginalization for one another.
And I think these are great principles just for living with each other, in all ways.
It makes you wonder how much of the rigidity is a community issue that we can heal for each other. When we're not calling down fire, you have a little bit more flexibility and more clarity about where you can move and what should move and what shouldn't. And so I really appreciate all of these ways that we can kind of strip back the layers of rigidity that we impose on each other. So it feels like that might be the most clarifying and healing thing that we can do as a community.
Yeah.
So thank you so much.
You're welcome.
All right, thanks so much for listening. We really hope that you enjoyed this conversation with Michael Wilcox. If you'd like to hear part 2 of this episode, you can find that in your podcast feed. And if Faith Matters content is resonating with you and you get the chance, we would love for you to leave us a review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen. We read all of the reviews and it really helps us to get the word out about Faith Matters, and we appreciate the support. Thanks again for listening, and remember you can check out more at faithmatters.org.